Myths and legends. Where do ancient stories come from, and what do they mean? Every civilization has its own myths and legends. But what if these ancient stories aren't just fiction? What if they're a universal language that still speaks to us today? Hello! We often hear the words myth and legend, but do we truly understand what they mean and how they differ? Let's explore why these ancient stories are more than just made-up tales and are actually the foundation of how we understand the world. A myth is essentially a deep, often sacred story that explains the origins of everything: gods, people, animals, natural phenomena, even entire civilizations. Myths answer the most fundamental questions. How did it all begin? Why are we here? Think of the grand myths of ancient Greece about the Titans and Olympian gods, or the Norse sagas that tell the tale of the creation of the world and its end, Ragnarok. These stories weren't just entertainment. They shaped worldviews and ethics, giving people answers to deep existential questions and helping them make sense of a chaotic world. A legend, unlike a myth, usually has some historical basis, a real event or person that over time has become embellished with fiction, miraculous details, and exaggerations. Legends can be linked to a historical hero and their feats, a significant place, or a sacred object. Examples include the legends of the valiant King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table, the noble outlaw Robin Hood hiding in Sherwood Forest, or the mysterious city of Kitej, sunk beneath the waters of a lake. There's definitely a grain of truth in them, but it's so embellished that separating fact from fiction becomes almost impossible. Legends often glorified heroes, preserved memories of great events, or passed on important moral lessons, reinforcing a sense of shared identity. Myths and legends share one thing: they are an integral part of a culture's DNA. They are not just bedtime stories, but powerful tools that humanity has used for millennia to understand the world, passing on knowledge, values, and traditions from generation to generation. They shaped collective memory and national identity, helping people cope with uncertainty and fear, explaining concepts of good and evil, the meaning of life, and the inevitability of death. These stories served as life lessons, codes of conduct, and an endless source of inspiration. Understanding myths and legends isn't just about studying the past. It's the key to understanding humanity itself, its aspirations, fears, and dreams, and how these ancient perceptions still invisibly influence our culture and worldview. Did you know that behind every ancient story lies something more than just fantasy? What if myths were early scientific hypotheses, attempts to explain lightning, stars, and even the human soul? Now that we've established that myths and legends are more than just stories, a natural question arises: where do they come from? What drove our ancestors to create these amazing stories? The answer lies in the very nature of human existence. Ancient people lived in a world full of mysteries that would stump modern science. They saw lightning tearing across the sky, heard the rumble of thunder, and felt the power of earthquakes and floods. How could they explain these phenomena without physics or meteorology? Naturally, through anthropomorphism, attributing human characteristics to natural forces. Thus, gods of thunder, goddesses of fertility, and spirits of rivers and forests were born. Myths became early scientific hypotheses, attempts to understand and organize the world, making it less frightening and more predictable. But it wasn't just nature that needed explaining. Humans have always questioned their origin and the meaning of life. Where did people come from? Why are we mortal? What happens after death? Myths about the creation of the world and humankind, the afterlife, and great heroes challenging fate provided answers to these existential questions. They shaped cosmogonies, worldviews in which every phenomenon and being had its place. These stories helped people understand their place in the universe, giving life meaning and purpose. Besides explaining nature and the cosmos, myths played a huge role in forming social structures and ethical norms. Imagine a primitive society without written laws. How do you regulate behavior, teach children the rules, and maintain order? Through stories. Myths about gods punishing those who break taboos, heroes showing valor and sacrifice, and the consequences of pride or greed were powerful tools for social control and education. They explained why you should respect elders, why you shouldn't steal, and why it was important to be brave when hunting or in battle. They were, in essence, morality and ethics textbooks passed down orally. And of course, myths deeply affected human psychology. They provided an outlet for collective fears, hopes, and desires. Myths about monsters and heroes helped to understand inner conflicts, the struggle between good and evil within each person. They helped cope with grief, explain pain and suffering, and give meaning to trials. Stories of love, betrayal, revenge, and forgiveness became universal templates for understanding human relationships and emotions. Thus, myths are not mere fantasies, but a complex system of knowledge, beliefs, and behavioral patterns created for the survival and development of human society in its early ages. They were everything: science, religion, a moral code, and psychological support. It's amazing, but stories about heroes, dragons, and great floods are repeated in myths around the world. Let's delve into their common roots to find out why these universal plots and characters appear again and again. It's amazing, but when studying the myths of different cultures, we inevitably encounter striking similarities. It's as if ancient people, separated by continents and millennia, drew inspiration from the same source. These recurring themes, characters, and storylines are called archetypes and universal motifs. One of the most striking examples is the hero archetype and the so-called hero's journey, brilliantly described by Joseph Campbell. Regardless of culture, the hero goes through similar stages: a call to adventure, a refusal of that call, meeting a mentor, overcoming challenges, descending into the underworld, symbolic or real, rebirth, and returning with a gift for their people. Think of Odysseus, who returns to Ithaca after long travels, Buddha, who attains enlightenment after a long search, or even Luke Skywalker from Star Wars. These stories resonate with us because they reflect a universal path of personal growth and transformation that every human can relate to. Another widespread motif is the myth of the Great Flood. Nearly every major civilization, from the Sumerians to the Mayans, from the ancient Hebrews to the peoples of Oceania, has its own version of the story of a great flood that destroyed almost all of humanity. Why such a striking similarity? Perhaps these are echoes of real climatic catastrophes that occurred in ancient times and were imprinted in the collective memory. Or maybe it's a symbolic expression of the idea of purification and a new beginning needed after a period of decline or sin. Or take the image of the dragon, a powerful, often sinister creature, guarding treasures or representing chaos. In China, the dragon is a symbol of wisdom and strength, bringing rain. In Europe, it is an evil monster that a knight must defeat, but in both cases, it is a colossal, primal force to be reckoned with. The dragon embodies our deepest fears and challenges that must be overcome. Its victory symbolizes the triumph of order over chaos, reason over instincts. Why are these archetypes so common? The Swiss psychoanalyst Carl Jung suggested the existence of a collective unconscious, a repository of images and ideas inherited from ancestors, common to all humankind. These universal patterns manifest in our dreams, art, and of course, in myths. Another theory suggests that similar myths arise from similar human experiences. All people face death, birth, love, fear of the unknown, and the desire for order. And of course, we cannot rule out cultural exchange. Ancient trade routes and migrations contributed to the spread of stories and ideas, which were then adapted to local realities. Thus, these universal plots and characters do more than just decorate ancient tales. They serve as a bridge between different cultures and eras, showing that despite all the differences, human experience is amazingly universal. They help us understand that we are all, in a sense, participating in one great narrative. Imagine, in an ancient city where every step was dictated by the will of the gods, a young woman dared to break a taboo. Her story, retold for centuries, became not just a warning, but a living reflection of all the fears, hopes, and moral values of that society. Imagine, in an ancient city where every step was dictated by the will of the gods, a young woman dared to break a taboo. Her story, retold for centuries, became not just a warning, but a living reflection of all the fears, hopes, and moral values of that society. This is how myths work. They serve not just as entertaining or explanatory stories. They are a profound mirror reflecting the soul of an entire civilization. Each culture, when creating its myths, involuntarily embedded its most cherished values. What was important to the ancient Greeks? Heroism, valor, the pursuit of glory, wisdom, and of course, respect for the gods, however capricious they may be. The myths about the exploits of Hercules, the cunning of Odysseus, or the wisdom of Athena clearly show what qualities were valued in their society. For the Egyptians, order, stability, and the cyclical nature of life and death were key, reflected in the myths of Osiris, Isis, and Ra, where maintaining Ma'at, cosmic order, was paramount. Through these stories, ideals of behavior, role models, and ideas about what it means to be a good member of society were passed down. But myths reflect not only values, but also deep-seated fears. What frightened people thousands of years ago? The unknown forces of nature, drought, floods, earthquakes, diseases. These fears were embodied in images of monsters, angry gods, and demons bringing cataclysms. Myths about floods, serpent dragons threatening the world, or underworlds full of dangers were a way to understand these threats and, perhaps, find ways to appease or overcome them. Fear of violating social norms was also reflected. Stories about punishments for pride, like Icarus, or disobedience to the gods, like Prometheus, served as powerful warnings, reinforcing social order. At the same time, Myths were a source of hopes and aspirations. Hopes for a harvest, for the continuation of the lineage, for victory in war, for a just ruler. These aspirations were expressed in myths about fertility gods, the Golden Age, the coming of a savior, or heroic ancestors who once established peace and prosperity. Stories about the afterlife gave hope for immortality or reunification with loved ones, helping to cope with grief and the inevitability of death. Myths were also a powerful tool for asserting and explaining moral and social attitudes. Why does the king have power? Because he is a descendant of the gods or chosen by them. Why should women be obedient? Because ancient customs enshrined in stories dictate it. Why are certain rituals important? Because the gods themselves established them. These stories legitimized power, hierarchy, and traditions, explaining their origin and justifying their necessity. They helped maintain social cohesion, passing on collective memory and shared beliefs. By studying myths, we are not just reading old stories. We are looking into the very heart of ancient civilizations, seeing through their eyes, feeling their fears and hopes. Myths are their voice, reaching us through the millennia, telling us what was most important to them. Consider this. Some myths were passed down orally for more than 100 generations before they were written down. This journey from whispers around a campfire to chiseled hieroglyphs is a true odyssey full of amazing transformations and mixtures. Consider this. Some myths were passed down orally for more than 100 generations before they were written down. This journey from whispers around a campfire to chiseled hieroglyphs is a true odyssey full of amazing transformations and mixtures. Before the advent of writing, a relatively recent invention in human history, myths existed exclusively in oral form. It was a living, ever-changing flow of information passed down from one generation to the next. Imagine an ancient tribe gathered around a campfire. An elder or shaman, possessing deep knowledge and memory, begins to tell a story about the creation of the world, the deeds of the gods, or the exploits of ancestors. Children and adults listen attentively, absorbing every word. There were no rigid rules in this process. The storyteller could adapt the story, highlighting the aspects that were most relevant to the current moment, adding new details or omitting less important ones. The myth was not a frozen text, but rather a flexible template that changed slightly each time, while remaining recognizable. This allowed stories to remain relevant and understandable to a changing society, reflecting its new challenges and values. This is why we often find several versions of the same myth even within the same culture. When different cultures came into contact, whether through trade, migration, or conquest, a unique phenomenon known as mythological syncretism occurred. Myths began to mix, exchanging elements. The gods of one culture could acquire the features or functions of the gods of another. Storylines intertwined, creating completely new, hybrid narratives. A classic example is the interaction between Greek and Roman mythologies, where Greek gods were adapted by the Romans under their own names and cults, while retaining many of their functions and stories. Or say, the spread of the flood myth around the world, which may have a common core, but each people retold it in their own way, adding local details. A real turning point in this journey of the myth came with the invention of writing. For the first time, it became possible to record these fluid, changeable stories on a tangible medium, on clay tablets, papyri, and parchments. This was a process that stretched for millennia. Some of the oldest written myths that have come down to us include the Sumerian Epic of Gilgamesh, the Egyptian pyramid texts, the Indian Vedas and Mahabharata, and Homer's poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey. Recording myths had colossal consequences. On the one hand, it ensured their unprecedented preservation. Myths no longer depended on the memory of one person or an entire generation. They could be read and studied centuries or even millennia later. It is thanks to writing that we can touch these ancient worlds today. On the other hand, recording froze the myth in a certain form. Its fluidity and the possibility of constant adaptation were gone. What was written often became canon, and any further changes could be perceived as distortion or heresy. Who was engaged in this monumental work of recording? Most often, these were priests, scribes, scholars, and poets who sought to preserve sacred texts, historical traditions, or simply the knowledge of their people. Their role was enormous. They not only rewrote, but also systematized, edited, and sometimes interpreted, shaping the versions of myths we know today. Thus, the transition from oral tradition to writing was not just a technical innovation, but a profound cultural transformation that changed the very nature of myths and their role in society. It preserved a priceless heritage for us, but also forever changed its living, breathing essence. Amazingly, the same ancient forces that drove the gods and heroes of the past still shape our dreams, fears, and even blockbusters. We live in a world steeped in myths, not even suspecting how deeply they are rooted in our modern culture. Amazingly, the same ancient forces that drove the gods and heroes of the past still shape our dreams, fears, and even blockbusters. We live in a world steeped in myths, not even suspecting how deeply they are rooted in our modern culture. It would seem that the era of gods and monsters has long passed, but their echoes continue to resonate everywhere, from books and movies to scientific names and even our everyday beliefs. Let's start with literature. Where would we be without ancient myths? Many classic works, such as Homer's poems or Ovid's Metamorphoses, are direct retellings of myths, but their influence extends far beyond that. Modern fantasy, from J.R.R. Tolkien with his elves and dragons to J.K. Rowling with her magical world, draws inspiration from ancient cosmogonies, legends of heroes, and magical creatures. Science fiction often uses mythological structures to create its universes, and psychological novels explore the archetypes we have already discussed. Myths provide writers with universal plot patterns and images that resonate with readers on a deep level. The film industry is perhaps the most striking example of the enduring power of myths. Look at the popularity of the Marvel and DC superhero sagas. What are they if not modern myths about demigods saving the world, possessing supernatural abilities, and fighting evil? Thor is a Norse god of thunder. Captain America is the embodiment of the American ideal of a hero. And Spider-Man is a story about responsibility and overcoming oneself. They all go through the hero's journey, familiar to us from ancient tales. Epic blockbusters like The Lord of the Rings or Avatar are built on archetypal conflicts and journeys that are rooted in mythology. Even video games, immersing us in fantasy worlds, often offer us the role of a hero who must save the world from ancient evil, repeating millennia-old plots. the influence of myths is noticeable in other areas as well. Art of all eras, from the Renaissance to modernism, constantly refers to mythological subjects and characters, filling them with new meaning. In science, we use the names of ancient Greek gods and heroes for the names of planets, Mars, Jupiter, constellations, Orion, Andromeda, chemical elements, Titan, and even medical terms. In psychology, especially in Carl Jung's analytical psychology, the concept of archetypes, universal patterns of human experience, is directly related to myths and their symbolism, helping us understand the collective unconscious. And finally, we cannot ignore the emergence of new myths. In our era, in the modern world, where traditional religions are losing some of their influence, new stories arise that perform the same functions as ancient myths. These can be national myths, uniting people around a common idea and history. For example, myths about the founding of a nation or about national heroes. These can be myths created in the field of marketing and branding, where companies tell stories about their products, giving them symbolic meaning and creating loyalty. And of course, these can be urban legends, internet memes, conspiracy theories. All these narratives, like ancient myths, explain the unknown, express collective fears and hopes, and shape our understanding of reality, albeit not always objective. Thus, myths are not simply relics of the past. They are living, constantly evolving structures that continue to shape our world, inspire us, and help us understand ourselves and the world around us. They are the universal language of humanity, eternally relevant and constantly updated. I hope this journey through the labyrinths of myths and legends has helped you see how deeply ancient stories continue to shape our world and our understanding of ourselves. If you want to continue to uncover the secrets of the past and understand their echoes in the present, be sure to subscribe to the Epoch Echoes channel and like this video. See you again in the world of timeless stories.